Today we are doing section 9.2. So we are going to be finding the surface area of prisms and cylinders. We've already worked on finding volume of them. So we're going to now focus on surface area. For our warm-ups, we are asked to find the area of each polygon. How do I find the area of a triangle? 1/2 base times height. So my area for a triangle is 1/2 little b times h. So on this first warm-up, they told me that my base, or little b, is what? 12, and my height is 9. What's half of 12? Times 9? 54. So on number 1, my area is 54. What are my units? Feet squared. What's my area formula for a square? Side squared. So area is side squared. They told us that we have a side length of 13. What is 13 squared? 169. My units this time would be inches squared. Good. How do we find the area of a rectangle? Base times height, or some people call it length times width. I prefer base times height. Either way, we multiply our two dimensions together. So we have 10 times 8, which gives us 80. My units, meters squared. Finally, on number 4, we have a circle. Good. Our area formula is pi r squared. They told us our radius is 3. So we have to remember, what do we do first? Multiply or use our exponent? Exponent goes first. If you remember your order of operations, PEMDAS. The exponent goes before multiplication. So 3 squared is 9. So if you were to leave it as 9 pi centimeters squared, that would be fine. But what if we multiply 9 times pi? Okay, 28.27. They told us to round to the nearest whole number. So that would be approximately 28 centimeters squared. On to our definitions. We've got 3 main definitions for today. Surface area is the sum of the areas of the polyhedra's faces. So remember, if we have a polyhedron, all the faces of it are polygons. So if we take the area of all those polygons and add them up, that would be the sum. That's our surface area. The lateral faces are faces of a prism that are not bases. So remember, in a prism, how many bases do you have? 2. So in a prism, we would have 2 bases, and then any other face that's not a base is called a lateral face. So the lateral surface area is the sum of the areas of the lateral faces. All right, in our next box, we've got the surface area of prisms formula. So the surface area, that's what SA stands for, if you need to write that off to the side. Surface area. We find that by taking 2 times capital B plus capital P times H. So this is the actual formula if you just want to write that on the line. Capital B still stands for the area of a base. We used capital B when we found volume as well. Same capital B. Capital P is the perimeter of the base. How do we find perimeter? Add up all the sides. And then H is still the same H we used when we did volume. That's the height of the prism, which sometimes we also thought about as the distance between bases. And I made a special note of circling capital P times H and saying that is the lateral area, in case that's what we're interested in. All right, on these examples, they want us to find LA and SA. So they want us to find the lateral area and the surface area. Which do you want to start with? I would think that starting with lateral is a good idea, because to find surface area, we're going to take a lateral area and add more onto it. So let's first start with identifying what our base is. Now with a rectangular prism, you can kind of choose whichever pair of sides you want or faces you want to be your base. I would recommend using this bottom or top face, using those as your bases. So that's like what the box would be sitting on the bottom. Once we know what we're using as our base, we should be able to find our lateral area and then our overall surface area. So for lateral area, on that last slide, they had circled P times H. That's what our lateral area is. What did capital P stand for? Perimeter of a base. So if I'm using one of these red rectangles that I outlined, either the top or the bottom, as my base, I have to be able to find its perimeter. So it might be useful to just draw it off to the side. What's the length of this left side?
15.
15, good. Which means the other side's also 15. What about the top side? 8. So the bottom side is also 8. So to find capital P, I need to add all those sides up. What do I get? 46. So I'm going to take 46 times, what is the height of my prism? 5. So to get my lateral area, I just multiply those together. What do I get? 230. My units would be yards squared, because we are finding area. This is a type of area, so our units will be squared. So that's part of what they wanted me to find, the lateral area. They also want the overall surface area. So to find surface area, we take 2 times capital B plus P times H. The nice part about doing lateral area first is that I've already calculated the P times H. So on my next step, I'm going to take 2 times capital B. I still have to figure that out. But then instead of putting the P times H, I can go ahead and write 230. We already calculated it. It's not changing. So the only thing that I really need to find still is capital B. What does capital B stand for? area of the base. So I drew one of my bases off to the side. How do I find its area? Multiply what? Multiply 15 times 8. And what do I get when I multiply 15 times 8? 120. So capital B was 120, so I plugged that in down there. So 2 times 120 plus 230.
470.
Yes, it will end up being 470. 2 times 120 gives us what? 240. And then we add the 230. So our overall surface area is 470 yards squared. It's still a type of area. We still have to square our units. On number 2, what shape is our base? Ken?
So yeah, that's what I have a question on. So
Okay.
how would you know if the triangle the base versus the rectangle or the square? And
So think about how you would name that prism. How would you name it?
honestly, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
So since we would call this a triangular prism, that's how we would have to name it. Our base is in the shape of a triangle. So you could highlight one or both of them, or just draw it off to the side. I like to draw mine, since they put a right angle in there, I'm just going to draw a right triangle. What length would my hypotenuse have? 15. And what about my legs? 9 and 12. So do we all see how this triangle, even though I drew it a little bit differently, is the same dimensions as the base triangles that they have in their 3D drawing? Okay, I would recommend trying to do that because it'll make it a little bit easier when we have to use these formulas. Okay, let's start with lateral area again. I'm going to try to switch colors so maybe we don't confuse it with that first problem. For lateral area, we need capital P times H. Capital P stands for the perimeter of my base. So I drew a base off to the side. To find the perimeter, what am I going to do? Add up all the sides. What do I get?
36.
So we're going to take 36 times H is the height of the prism, 10. Good, so our lateral area is 360. What would my units be? Centimeters squared. Are we okay with lateral area? All right, let's move on to surface area. For surface area, we've got to take 2 times capital B. I'm just going to leave parentheses because we haven't calculated that yet. Plus P times H, we just calculated. So instead of writing P times H, what could I put?
360.
The 360. Now to continue on, I need to know what my capital B is. Capital B stands for what? Area of the base. What shape does my base have? A triangle. How do we find the area of a triangle? 1/2 base times height. So for this triangle, what's my base and what's my height? 9 is my base. 12 is the height. So remember, we're just focusing on that little triangle we drew off to the side. Okay, I think we've already calculated this once today. 54. Capital B is equal to 54. Remember, if you don't have a calculator, You can take half of the 12 first and then multiply it to the 9 if that makes it easier. You can take half of either number if they're all getting multiplied. So I think it's easier to take half of an even number, right? Okay, so now we got to take 2 times 54. 108 plus 360. What do we get? 468. My units? Centimeters squared. So we found lateral area, and then we also found our surface area. All right, on number 3, let's first talk about what shape our base has. I want you to be careful because this one is not necessarily sitting on its base. So what shape does our base have? Thank you, Julian. Our base is a triangle. Remember, we have 2 bases. We got 2 triangles. The bases have to be parallel to one another. So we've got 2 triangles here. Even though they did not draw in their right angles, these are right triangles that we've got there. So if I'm just drawing one of my bases off to the side so that I can label it, what am I going to label the hypotenuse? 5, and my legs? 3 and 4. Are we all okay with just labeling a diagram of our base? Okay, so let's start again with lateral area. We need capital P times H. What is my capital P this time? 12, good. So we add 3, 5, and 4. What about my H? 8, good. Remember that this H is the height of the prism, or the distance between the bases. 12 times 8 would give me 96. My units? Inches squared. Questions about lateral area? Okay, so then we go to find our overall surface area. We're going to have 2 times capital B plus P times H. Now, lucky for us, we already found P times H. So this is going to be 2 times. I'll leave a space because I don't know what capital B is yet. Plus, what does P times H come out to be? 96. We just found it. So now we just need to revisit that blank we left for capital B. I know I keep repeating myself, but what does capital B stand for? Area of a base. Our base has what shape? A triangle. How do we find the area of a triangle? 1/2 little b little h, referring just to that triangle. So I'm going to take 1/2 times what? 3 times 4. What is 1/2 times 3 times 4? 6. You could take the 3 times the 4 first if you want to, and then take half of it. Either way, you should get that capital B equals 6, so we can plug that in. Yes, I believe you're correct. What is 2 times 6? 12. And then we've got 12 plus 96, which is 108. My units? Inches squared. So we found our lateral area and our surface area. What type of prism is number 4? A rectangular, which means we kind of can choose what we want to be our bases. So you tell me, are we doing top and bottom, left side, right side, front side, back side? What do you want to use as your base? Top and bottom. Okay. That works for me. It really doesn't matter. You just have to pick what your base is and stick with it on rectangular ones. So if I draw out this rectangle that we said was going to be our base, what's the length of the top edge? 10, and the bottom edge would also be 10, and the side edges are not 10. They are 5. So it's almost like I just picked this rectangle up from the top and labeled it up here.
30.
What's 30? I think you're on the right track. We are going to want a 30. So we're finding lateral area. What's the first thing I'm supposed to calculate? Perimeter. So capital P, the perimeter of our base, which if we take 10 plus 10 plus 5 plus 5, we get 30. We have to multiply that to what?
6.
6, the height of our overall prism.
I'm doing it. 180.
We get 180. My units? Inches squared. Good. So we're done with lateral area. We can move on to surface area. We know we're going to have to take 2 times capital B, which we haven't calculated yet. We can do that in a minute. Plus P times H, we just figured out was 180. So now let's go back to that blank we left for capital B. Capital B stands for what? Area of a base. So if we look at this base we drew up here, how would we find its area? Multiply 5 and 10 and we get 50. So that's how we get our capital B. If you need to write it out, that's fine. Base times height, 5 times 10. That's how we got the 50 that went in for capital B. 2 times 50? Surface area. 2 times 50 is just 100, right? Okay, and then we add the 180. What do we get? 280. My units? Inches squared. This really is not any different from the formula that we just had for prisms, except for a cylinder, what shape does our base have? A circle. So 2 times capital B, well, the area of a circle is pi r squared. Okay, and then we would have perimeter times the height. The perimeter of a circle is also called circumference, which is 2 pi r. So this really is not a different formula. It's just special because of the circles. All right, we're finding lateral area and surface area still, but now we've got cylinders. So our surface area, 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi r h. Okay, so I'm just writing it up at the top so that I've got it as a reminder.
What do we round to?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's talk about it when we get there.
Oh.
Are we going to find lateral area or surface area first?
Surface. What?
I mean, you can do either, but it's easier really if we find which one first. Lateral. It's the shorter one, the quicker one, the smaller one, and then we can reuse it when we find surface area. So to find the lateral area, we just need the second part of our surface area formula. 2 times pi times r times h. What is my r on number 5? 5. And what is my h? 2. Now, if I'm going for an exact answer, which means I'm not multiplying out pi, what numbers are going to get multiplied together? 5 and 2 and
2.
the 2 in the front. So 2 times 5 times 2 would give me what? 20 pi. I would leave it in terms of pi because that'll be useful for us on the next part. What would our units be? Yards squared. Now, if you did multiply it out, what would you get? You would have a decimal. 62.8 yards squared. So if you're going to round it, rounding it to the tenths is fine. But for the next part, I would recommend leaving it with the pi in there. So on the next part, when we find surface area, we're going to take 2 times pi times my radius squared. My radius is still 5. Plus, and then this whole second part I already calculated to be 20 pi. So I'm just going to leave it as 20 pi. Are we all okay with the fact that we calculated the back part of it? We're just reusing it, just like last time? Okay, here we're going to square the 5. 5 squared is 25, and multiply it to that 2 out in front. We get 50 pi plus 20 pi. What do you think we can do with 50 pi plus 20 pi?
I don't know.
How many pies do you think that gives us?
70 pies.
70 pi.
You're the only one that added.
Now that's why I said to leave it in terms of pi, because then we can easily add those together. 50 pi plus 20 pi gives us 70 pi. So we could leave our surface area as 70 yards squared. You could multiply 70 pi yards squared. You could multiply the 70 pi out. What would we get?
A big number.
It's not that big.
219.9.
219. Do we agree with 0.9? Yards squared. Now, if it does not say find exact or approximate, I'm fine with either one. So there's our surface area options and our lateral area options. Exact is when you still have a pi. Approximate is when you multiply it out because you had to round it. On number 6, if I start with my lateral area, that's when I'm going to take 2 times pi times my radius times the height.
4 times 6.
Good. My radius is 4 because we have to take half of the diameter to get the radius. 6 is still considered the height of my cylinder, even though it's turned on its side. Remember, height of a cylinder or a prism is just the distance between the bases. So the distance between the circles is 6, even though we don't really usually think of that direction as being height. All right, if I multiply my 2 times 4 times 6, what do I get?
48 pi.
Good, 48 pi. Our units would be inches squared. If you want to multiply the 48 times the pi, that's fine. I would not recommend doing that, especially on lateral area, though. When we move on to surface area, we're going to take 2 times pi times 4 squared. Remember that for that first part of surface area, the radius gets squared. And then we're going to add the 48 pi. What is 4 squared?
16.
16, and then multiply by that 2 out in front.
32.
32, good.
Yeah.
So we have 32 pi plus 48 pi gives us
85.
80 pi. Our units would still be inches squared, and if you want to, you can multiply out the 80 times the pi. Anybody do that? 251.3 inches squared. Questions, concerns? Okay, that's it for today's note.